Darcy knew the sum before he reached the final page. Numbers had weight when they belonged to people. £214, divided among the tenant accounts at Pemberley, meant repairs deferred, wall payments withheld from the proceeds of the cloth, and obligations which men of lesser means could not postpone merely because their landlord disliked the explanation. He read Mr. Pritchard's report a second time beside the library fire. The December light was failing early beyond the tall windows of his London house, turning the glass to dull silver. On the table lay the steward's neat account, 3 contradictory statements from a London agent now dead, and a letter from Darcy's solicitor recommending patience. Patience was a virtue most often commended by people who did not owe £214 to Derbyshire farmers. The wool had been purchased from Pemberley tenants and small neighbouring proprietors, then sent under the estate's contract to a Yorkshire manufactory to be made into cloth for foreign sale. Darcy's late agent, Mr. Fenton, had arranged such consignments for years. The tenant prices were entered, the finished bales left the manufactory, and a partial payment came back. The balance had not. Fenton's last letter claimed the Lisbon buyer had refused several bales of cloth for inferior quality. A later account credited those same bales as fine cloth sold at the full price, while another paper showed a loss at sea even though the ship had arrived. At least one statement was false, and Darcy saw no reason yet to acquit the other 2. Darcy crossed to the bell and pulled it. When his footman appeared, he said, "Ask Mrs. Annesley whether my sister is at liberty to receive me before dinner." The request sounded absurd within his own house, yet he had promised Georgiana that he would not enter her sitting room whenever anxiety drove him from his own, call it brotherly attention, and then spend half the visit thinking of something else. Georgiana had never accused him of the habit. Mrs. Annesley had required only a tactful sentence to show him that he did it. When the footman returned with an invitation, Darcy left the papers behind and went upstairs. Georgiana sat at the pianoforte with a pencil in her hand and a page of music propped before her, while Mrs. Annesley worked near the fire. Both ladies looked up when he entered, and the guarded uncertainty which once would have appeared in his sister's face was absent. Darcy counted that improvement among the few he had not been foolish enough to manage by force. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Only my argument with Clementi." Georgiana indicated the page. "He has the advantage of not being present to defend himself. Then I advise you to press it." She smiled and moved from the instrument to the sofa, where a tea tray waited between the ladies. Darcy accepted a cup, though he had little wish for it, and asked Georgiana about the piece. She spoke with growing ease, because music gave shape to thoughts she still hesitated to offer in a crowded room. For 10 minutes, he attended to her entirely. Then she said, "You have read bad news." Darcy set down his cup. "Have I been so poor a companion?" "No, but you took no sugar, and you have been looking at the same coal for half a minute." "I often take no sugar. You took it yesterday." Mrs. Annesley's needle continued its measured progress, her expression betraying nothing. "There is a difficulty in one of the estate accounts," he said. "Nothing you need fear." Georgiana's eyes lowered briefly. He heard, too late, the old habit in his answer: reassurance without information, protection offered as a closed door. "Some tenant payments are delayed," he added. "The sum is not great to Pemberley, but it may be great to them. I must discover why the London accounts disagree." "Will you go to Derbyshire?" "Not yet. The answer appears to be here." "Then I hope you find it soon." She hesitated. "And that the tenants know they have not been forgotten." The observation came so near his own uneasiness that he looked at her sharply, a movement Georgiana mistook before retreating into silence. "They shall know it," he said more gently. "You are right to remind me." He had written to Pritchard before leaving the library, but the letter had contained only directions. Georgiana's words revealed the omission. Money entered in an estate account did not tell a tenant why it had been late or whether the delay might occur again. A man who had sold his wool in good faith should not be left to wonder whether his landlord considered the debt too small to remember. "I shall write again this evening," he said. "Pritchard may tell each man that the estate accepts the debt and that inquiry will not delay payment." Georgiana looked pleased, though she said only, "That seems right." Darcy felt the mild rebuke of her simplicity. He had spent the morning mastering contradictory accounts, while she had required one sentence to restore the people concealed by them. Her shoulders eased, and a moment later she returned to Clementi. Darcy remained until she had played the troublesome passage twice. The second attempt pleased her, and he was glad he had heard it. His solicitor, Mr. Alderton, received him the following morning in chambers off Lincoln's Inn. The room was warmed beyond comfort and crowded with deed boxes, whose labels represented a formidable portion of English landed anxiety. Alderton was a spare gentleman near 50, deliberate in speech and immune to intimidation by income. The journey east had been slowed near Temple Bar by a wagon carrying rolled cloth, where two labourers braced their shoulders beneath a shifting load, while the driver shouted advice from comparative safety. Farther on, a clerk ran through the rain with a packet held beneath his coat. From a West End dining room, London commerce appeared as wine, candles, gloves, and prices in a newspaper. Here it had wet boots and strained backs. Pemberley's wool and the cloth made from it had passed through country carts, a Yorkshire manufactory, inns, warehouse yards, ships, and foreign hands between a tenant's flock and the money promised for it. Darcy had known every stage in principle without being required to imagine the people at each one until the system failed. "You paid the tenants?" he asked after reading Pritchard's report. "I directed the steward to advance the outstanding balances from the estate account yesterday." "Good." Darcy disliked the relief he felt at the word. The debt was ours, whether the loss arose from negligence or deceit, an opinion less universal than it ought to be. Alderton placed Fenton's letters side by side. "Your late agent's death complicates inquiry. His clerk? Dismissed when the office closed. I am told he has gone north. And the broker who arranged the London sale? Silas Rook. Fenton called him reliable. Fenton also represented one cargo as refused, sold, and lost, not in the same letter, a refinement which may comfort his executors." Darcy almost smiled, for Alderton reserved his driest remarks for documents that insulted him. The solicitor examined the shipping account. Gardiner and Company advanced money for the Lisbon buyers. Darcy read the common enough name. London contained many Gardiners, yet his mind supplied another connection at once. Mrs. Bennet's brother in trade, whose house in Gracechurch Street had been mentioned at Netherfield with all the delicacy Miss Bingley brought to the relations of others, and Miss Elizabeth Bennet's uncle. At Netherfield the Gardiner connection had been mentioned as evidence against the Bennets' consequence. An uncle in Cheapside, or near enough for fashionable contempt, had required no further description. Darcy had accepted the judgment because it agreed with his first impression of the family. Now a solicitor who valued accuracy called the same man's reputation sound, and a disputed Pemberley account led directly to his door. Darcy disliked lessons that arranged themselves with such obvious symmetry, however just they might be. He had not thought of Elizabeth for 3 days, and the precision of the count condemned the assertion. He remembered her at Netherfield after her walk through muddy fields, eyes bright from exertion and concern for her sister, making every fashionable objection to her appearance seem trivial. He remembered refusing to dance at Meryton and discovering too late that she had heard him. He had not intended to insult her, but intent had not prevented the insult. It had certainly not prevented her from laughing at him thereafter. "Do you know the firm?" Alderton asked. "Not directly. Their reputation is sound. Edward Gardiner has correspondents in Portugal and Spain and conducts a cautious business. If his house advanced the purchase money, he may possess copies Fenton did not preserve. Then write to him." Alderton leaned back. "I can request papers. He may provide them." If you wish to understand the manner in which the transaction was conducted, you would do better to speak to him yourself. Why should a personal visit produce what a written request will not? Because your solicitor may ask for copies and receive copies. A merchant deciding whether to trust you may show you where they came from, who carried them, and which omissions trouble him. Papers do not explain the habits surrounding their creations. You believe Gardiner distrusts Pemberley. I believe a prudent merchant distrusts any transaction that has ceased to make sense. Your income does not make the figures agree. Darcy could not fault the answer, though he disliked that a visit to Gracechurch Street felt like a concession when it was merely the shortest road to knowledge. His attention returned to Gardiner's name. Is that necessary? No. Alderton folded his hands. It is merely useful. The distinction was not lost upon him. You know of my connection to the family. I know London, Mr. Darcy. In London, a gentleman may acquire facts about another gentleman without making a hobby of him. There is no connection. Then your objection is removed. Darcy rose and walked to the window. Below, clerks and barristers crossed the square beneath umbrellas, black figures moving through grey rain. Gracechurch Street ought to have presented no difficulty. He had called upon men in counting-houses, inspected mills, questioned stewards, and sat beside tenants in kitchens where no one knew what subject could be safely discussed with the master of Pemberley. Duty often required discomfort. This discomfort had laughing dark eyes and a memory for careless words. "Request an appointment," he said. "I shall do so today. Do not mention Miss Bennet." Alderton's brows rose. I had not proposed to. Darcy returned home dissatisfied with the interview, and more dissatisfied with himself. Before the post closed, he completed the second letter to Pritchard. He named every tenant whose balance was to be paid and directed that no deduction be made for the expense of tracing the error. Then, after an interval, he added that Pritchard should apologize in Darcy's name for the delay. The line looked inadequate, but he left it standing. Pritchard's original report supplied particulars the London accounts had obscured. Samuel Tighe expected the balance to repair the roof over his shearing shed. The widow Larkin had sold 2 fleeces from a reduced flock and counted upon the money before Christmas. John Reddish owed wages to the boy who assisted him. None faced ruin. That was not the measure. Pemberley had taken their wool and made them wait without explanation. Darcy began a separate letter to the steward, then stopped. He had already issued directions, and a third set would not make the first 2 wiser. The impulse to act again arose chiefly because action relieved his own discomfort. That recognition was unwelcome enough to remind him of Netherfield. He had judged Bingley in danger of a foolish attachment, judged Jane Bennet indifferent, judged the family's impropriety decisive, and removed his friend to London before doubt could interfere. The departure had been efficient. Bingley had yielded, Caroline had approved, and the lease could wait. Darcy had mistaken the smooth execution of a decision for proof that the decision was right. He still believed his concerns had substance, which made the matter worse rather than better. A baseless judgment could be abandoned, while a judgment built upon selected truths defended itself. On his desk, 3 accounts described the same cloth as refused, sold, and lost, each containing enough truth to survive a hurried reading. Until then, it was merely speed supplied with authority. Mr. Gardiner's reply arrived the next afternoon. He would be pleased to receive Mr. Darcy on Thursday at 11 concerning the Pemberley consignment. If Mr. Darcy could remain for an early family dinner afterwards, Mrs. Gardiner would welcome the opportunity to renew a slight Hertfordshire acquaintance. Darcy read the final sentence twice before folding the note. The invitation was courteous and unmistakable. Mr. Gardiner would discuss business with him, but he would not pretend his niece did not exist for Darcy's convenience. Darcy respected the loyalty, even while suspecting it had been directed against him. A lesser man might have apologized for the family invitation or carefully separated his niece from the transaction. Gardiner did neither. He offered hospitality upon his own terms and left Darcy to decide whether Pride would make him less useful to his tenants. Darcy carried the note to the library fire, though he did not burn it. He stood looking into the flames until the paper warmed between his fingers. Then he crossed to his desk and wrote his acceptance. His tenants required him to go to Gracechurch Street. The